The grand ballroom was buzzing, a symphony of clinking glasses, soft music, and happy chatter. At the head table, my brother Ben and his new wife Amelia were glowing, lost in their own perfect world. But I wasn't looking at them. My eyes were fixed on my husband, Derek. He sat beside the empty chair that was meant for me, his knuckles white as he gripped a water glass. His handsome face, the one that had charmed me years ago, was twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. He looked like a volcano about to erupt. Every person in that room could feel the heat coming off him. They just didn't know why. Then, the heavy oak doors of the reception hall swung open. A hush fell over the room, starting near the entrance and spreading like a wave. Every head turned, and there I was. I took a slow, deliberate breath and stepped inside. But I wasn't alone. On my arm was a handsome, distinguished man with kind eyes and a quiet strength. It was Nathan, Audrey's husband. Whispers erupted. "Is that... Who is he? What is going on?" I could feel hundreds of eyes on us, but I ignored them all. I only had eyes for Derek. His jaw dropped. The fury in his eyes was now mixed with utter disbelief. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Across the room, I saw his ex, Audrey, sitting with Derek's parents. The color drained from her face, and her perfectly painted smile vanished. I didn't scowl or glare. I didn't need to. I simply smiled, a calm, serene smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, and let Nathan escort me across the floor. We were the picture of elegance and grace, a stark contrast to the ugly storm brewing at the head table. The real show was just beginning. It had all started a week ago, on a Tuesday. I was in the kitchen, humming to myself as I packed a box with the wedding favors I had spent weeks making. They were little jars of homemade jam, each with a custom label. Derek walked in, kissed the top of my head, and grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. "Hey, honey," he said, his voice casual. Too casual. "I was just on the phone with my mom. We were finalizing the seating chart for our side of the family." "Oh, great," I said, not looking up. "Is it all sorted?" "Almost," he said, taking a loud crunch of his apple. "There was just one small addition. I told Mom it would be fine. I invited Audrey." I froze. My hand stopped mid-air. Audrey, his ex-girlfriend, the woman his family still called the one that got away, the shadow that had loomed over our entire marriage. I slowly placed the jar I was holding onto the counter and turned to face him. He was already wearing his defensive look, the one that was supposed to make me feel guilty for even questioning him. "Now, before you say anything," he started, holding up a hand. "She's family, you know. She grew up with my cousins. It would be weird if she wasn't there." I just stared at him, my heart starting to beat a little faster. He knew how I felt about Audrey. He knew the years of little humiliations I had endured, the family dinners where I was ignored while they all reminisced with her. He saw the look on my face and pushed a little harder, framing it as a test. It was always a test with him. "Besides," he said, his voice softening into that manipulative tone I knew so well, "if you trust me, you won't mind." There it was. The magic phrase. The one that always worked. The one that made me feel like a jealous, insecure wife if I dared to object. For years I had swallowed my feelings and played along. For years I had let him win. But as I stood there, looking at his smug, confident face, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, firm click. The part of me that always tried to please him, that always backed down, just went silent. A new feeling washed over me. It wasn't anger or sadness, it was clarity. I let a sweet, gentle smile spread across my face. I walked over to him, straightened his collar, and looked him right in the eyes. "Of course, honey," I said, my voice as smooth as silk. "Why would I mind? The more the merrier." He was so relieved, so pleased with himself for winning again, that he didn't see the change in my eyes. He didn't see the storm gathering behind my calm smile. He didn't expect that as he planned to have his family there, I would be making plans of my own. He thought he was testing my trust. He had no idea he had just given me the one thing I needed to finally set myself free. And as he walked away, whistling, I knew one thing for sure. My brother's wedding was going to be a day no one would ever forget. The sweet smile I gave Derek stayed on my face until he left the kitchen. The moment I heard his footsteps fade down the hall, my face fell. The cheerful hum in my throat died, replaced by a cold, heavy silence. I sank into a kitchen chair, the half-packed wedding favors forgotten on the table. It wasn't just that he had invited Audrey. It was the way he said it, with that smug confidence, so sure that his little trust me trick would work again. For years it had. For years I had been the good wife, the understanding partner, the woman who smiled through the pain. But a person can only be stretched so far before they break. My mind drifted back to our first Christmas as a married couple. We were at his parents' house, the air thick with the scent of pine and roasting turkey. I had spent weeks picking out the perfect gifts, wanting so badly to fit in, to be accepted. When it was time to open presents, Derek's mother handed me a beautifully wrapped box. Inside was a beige scarf. It was a nice scarf, I guess, but it was completely generic. A gift you'd give to a coworker you barely knew. A few minutes later, she handed a box to Audrey, who was there with her then-boyfriend Nathan. Audrey unwrapped a rare first-edition copy of her favorite book. She had mentioned wanting it once, months ago. Derek's mother had remembered. Audrey shrieked with joy and hugged her. "You always know me best," she'd said, shooting a triumphant little glance my way. I sat there, clutching my beige scarf, feeling like a ghost at their family reunion. When I later told Derek it had hurt my feelings, he just sighed. "You're being too sensitive, Chloe. Mom loves you. It's just a gift." Then there was my 30th birthday. Derek had booked a table at the fanciest restaurant in the city. I'd bought a new dress. I felt, for the first time in a long time, that the night was about me. We had just ordered our food when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "I have to take this," he said, his face suddenly serious. "It's Audrey. She sounds upset." He walked away from the table, leaving me alone with the breadbasket and the pitying looks from the waiter. I could see him through the restaurant window, pacing on the sidewalk, his expression full of concern as he listened to her. 20 minutes passed. The waiter brought my soup. I ate it alone. When Derek finally came back, he looked drained. "Sorry about that," he said, sliding back into his seat. "She and Nathan had a fight. She really needed someone to talk to." He didn't seem to notice the single perfect tear that rolled down my cheek and splashed onto the tablecloth. It was my birthday, and I was playing second fiddle to his ex-girlfriend's drama. I was pulled back to the present by the ticking of the kitchen clock. Each tick sounded like a tiny hammer, chipping away at the wall I had built around my heart. For years, I had accepted this. I had believed him when he said they were just friends. I had believed him when he said his family's attachment to her meant nothing. I had believed him when he said I was the one he loved, the one he chose. But his words were cheap. His actions told the real story. Inviting her to my own brother's wedding wasn't just disrespectful, it was a statement. It was him telling me, loud and clear, that her place in his life was permanent, and my feelings didn't matter. The old Chloe would have cried. She would have started a fight, and Derek would have twisted her words until she was the one apologizing. But the old Chloe was gone. In her place was a woman who was tired of being a supporting character in her own life. A quiet, cold resolve settled over me. I wasn't going to fight him. I was going to expose him. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out my laptop and opened it on the kitchen table. There was only one other person who was trapped in this lie with me. The quiet, dignified man who always stood by Audrey's side, his eyes holding a sadness I now understood. Nathan. He was a private person, not one for social media, but I knew he was a respected architect. I opened a search engine and typed, "Nathan Miller, Architect." His firm's website popped up immediately. There, on the Our Team page, was his professional headshot and a corporate email address. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. This was the point of no return. My finger hovered over the trackpad, the cursor blinking over the compose button. I took one last, deep breath, and I clicked. The email I sent was short and to the point. I introduced myself as Derek's wife and asked if he would be willing to meet for a coffee to discuss something important. I didn't mention Audrey. I didn't mention the wedding. I just held my breath and hit send, feeling like I had just lit the fuse on a bomb. He replied within the hour. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., the Grind Cafe on Elm Street. Is that okay? My heart was a hummingbird in my chest. It was happening. The next morning, I chose a small table in the back corner of the cafe, far from the windows. The air smelled of roasted coffee and rain. Every time the little bell on the door chimed, I jumped. Was I insane? What was I even going to say? Every worst-case scenario played out in my head. He would laugh in my face, accuse me of being a jealous wife, or worse, immediately call Audrey and tell her everything. I was stirring my lukewarm coffee for the 10th time when a man's shadow fell over my table. Chloe? I looked up. It was Nathan. He was taller than I remembered, with a kind face that was etched with lines of weariness around the eyes. He wasn't angry or suspicious, just tired. He looked as tired as I felt. Nathan. Thank you for coming, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He gave me a small, sad smile and sat down. I have a feeling I know why you asked me here. The directness of his statement caught me off guard. The carefully rehearsed speech I had prepared vanished from my mind. So I just told him the truth, starting with the conversation in the kitchen. I didn't accuse Audrey of anything. I just talked about how I felt. I told him about the Christmases and birthdays, about the constant feeling of being second best, of being an outsider in my own marriage. I told him that Derek inviting Audrey to my brother's wedding felt like the final unbearable straw. I feel like I'm going crazy, I finished, looking down at my hands, which were trembling in my lap. Derek makes me feel like I'm being jealous and unreasonable, but it hurts. It just really hurts. I braced myself for his response, for him to defend his wife, to tell me I was misreading things. Instead, there was a long silence. When I finally dared to look up, his eyes were filled with a deep, profound sadness. You're not crazy, Chloe, he said softly. His voice was steady, but full of pain. And you're not alone. I've seen it too. The late-night phone calls that she says are just a friend. The way she lights up when his name appears on her phone. For a long time, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was the one who was insecure. He paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He unlocked it and slid it across the table to me. I saw this last week. She thought her phone was locked. It wasn't. On the screen was a text message exchange between Audrey and Derek. It was from the day Derek had told me he invited her. Derek, all set. You're officially on the guest list. Audrey, you're the best. I can't wait to see you at the wedding. My breath caught in my throat. It was the heart emoji. That tiny red heart. It was a small thing, but it was everything. It was the confirmation of a secret language, a shared intimacy that excluded me and Nathan entirely. It was proof that I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being sensitive. I was being betrayed. I pushed the phone back to him, a cold fire spreading through my veins. The hurt was still there, but now it was mixed with a powerful, clarifying anger. We sat in silence for another moment, two strangers in a cafe, bound together by the same quiet heartbreak. What are we going to do? I asked, my voice stronger now. Nathan looked at me, a new determination in his tired eyes. For years, we've let them control the story, he said. They make us the villains, the jealous spouses who just don't understand their special friendship. What if we stopped letting them do that? An idea, wild and terrifying and brilliant, sparked in my mind. What if we show up at the wedding together? Nathan's sad smile returned, but this time it held a glint of rebellion. As your date? He told me if I trusted him, I wouldn't mind her being there, I said, the words tasting like poison and power. I think it's time we showed them what trust really looks like. A silent, powerful agreement passed between us. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. We would walk into that wedding not as victims, but as the ones who were finally ready to pull back the curtain. As I walked out of the cafe and into the rain, I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt powerful. I had an ally. And we had a plan. The morning of my brother's wedding arrived with a sky the color of a pale pearl. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, but I felt no warmth. My stomach was a tight knot of nerves and icy resolve. I sat at my vanity, staring at my own reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed different. Her eyes, usually soft and accommodating, held a new, steely glint. Today was the day. I carefully applied my makeup, my hands surprisingly steady. I was an actress preparing for the role of a lifetime, the dutiful wife. When I slipped on my dress, a simple, elegant sheath of deep blue, it felt less like a celebration and more like armor. Derek walked into the room, already dressed in his tailored suit. He looked handsome, confident, and completely oblivious. He smiled, that easy, charming smile that used to make my heart flutter. Now, it just made my blood run cold. "Wow, Chloe, you look stunning," he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "See? I told you it would all be fine. Just a happy family celebration." He was so proud of himself, so sure that he had won, that I had folded just like I always did. I gave him the same sweet, empty smile I had been practicing all week. "You look very handsome, honey," I replied. He kissed my cheek, a quick, dismissive peck, before grabbing his keys. "Great. I'll see you at the church. Mom wants me to get there early to help with the seating." Of course she did. The church was beautiful, filled with white roses and the soft, hopeful notes of a string quartet. But the beauty was lost on me. As I walked down the aisle to my seat, I saw Derek standing near the front with his parents, and right beside them, laughing at something Derek's father said, was Audrey. She was wearing a vibrant red dress, a bold, attention-grabbing color that stood out against the soft pastels of the wedding party. She looked like she belonged there, more than I did. Derek saw me, gave me a quick, almost imperceptible nod, and then immediately turned back to Audrey, placing a hand on the small of her back to guide her into the family pew. My seat, next to my own parents, was on the other side of the aisle, but the seat reserved for me in the front row, next to the groom's family, remained empty. Derek and his parents filled one side of the pew, and Audrey slid in right next to them, leaving no room for me. They were a perfect, happy family unit, and I was the outsider. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. I could hear the faint whispers from my own relatives. Where is she supposed to sit? Why is Derek over there with her? The looks of pity were like tiny needles on my skin. For a fleeting moment, a wave of shame and humiliation washed over me. The old Chloe wanted to run out of the church and cry. But then I looked back at Derek, laughing with Audrey as if I didn't exist, and the shame hardened into pure, unshakable resolve. He wanted to publicly show everyone my place. Fine. I would do the same for him. I sat through the ceremony, a solitary figure in the front row. I watched my brother Ben, his eyes shining with love for his bride, Amelia. I heard them exchange vows, their voices thick with emotion and promise. It was a beautiful, perfect moment, and a part of me felt a terrible pang of guilt for the storm I was about to unleash on their special day. But then I remembered the years of quiet degradation, the endless gaslighting, the slow erosion of my self-worth. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about taking back my life. When the ceremony ended and the organs swelled to a triumphant crescendo, the guests rose to their feet, clapping. As people began to file out, Derek finally made his way over to me. He didn't offer his arm. He didn't even look me in the eye. "Great ceremony," he said briskly. We're all heading to the reception now. I'll save you a seat at the head table." And with that, he turned and walked away, falling into step with Audrey and his parents. I stood there, alone in the aisle, watching them go. He'll save me a seat. The condescension in his voice was the final push I needed. Oh, he'd save me a seat, all right. But I had no intention of taking it. I didn't go into the reception hall right away. Instead, I stood outside on the stone patio, listening to the muffled thrum of the bass and the waves of laughter coming from within. The evening air was cool on my skin, a welcome contrast to the fire in my veins. I wasn't nervous anymore. The time for nerves had passed. Now there was only a profound, chilling calm. I was a general on a hilltop, watching the battlefield below, waiting for the precise moment to signal the charge. A sleek black car pulled up to the entrance and Nathan stepped out. He looked impeccable in a dark suit, his expression composed and serious. Our eyes met across the driveway, and in that single look, everything was understood. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a shared, silent resolve. He walked over to me, stopping a few feet away. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. I gave him a small, firm nod. "It's time." He offered me his arm, a classic, gentlemanly gesture that felt both formal and revolutionary. I placed my hand on his forearm. His muscles were tense beneath the fine wool of his suit jacket. We were two soldiers, marching into enemy territory together. We walked to the grand oak doors and pushed them open. The blast of warmth, music, and light was instantaneous. For a second, no one noticed us. The DJ was playing an upbeat song, couples were on the dance floor, and the air was filled with the scent of wine and roses. We stood there for a moment, letting the scene wash over us, two quiet figures in the doorway. Then, the first head turned. A cousin of mine. Her eyes widened, and she nudged the person next to her. That person turned, and then another, and another. A ripple of silence began to spread from the back of the room, moving forward like a slow, inevitable tide. The laughter faltered. The music suddenly seemed too loud. The dancers slowed to a stop. My eyes scanned the room, taking in every reaction like a snapshot. I saw my brother, Ben, at the head table, his happy expression melting into one of utter confusion. He looked from me to Nathan, then over to Derek, his brow furrowed. I saw Derek's parents, their faces contorting from polite smiles to masks of horror and indignation. And then I saw Audrey. She was seated next to Derek, her red dress like a splash of blood against the white tablecloth. She had been laughing, her head thrown back, but her laughter died in her throat. Her smile didn't just fade, it shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty, sickly white. She knew. In that instant, she knew her game was over. But my main focus, my entire world in that moment, was Derek. His back had been partially to the door, but he turned when the room went quiet, a look of annoyance on his face, ready to see what had caused the disruption. And then he saw me. He saw me standing there, poised and serene. And he saw Nathan, with my hand resting confidently on his arm. His charming facade didn't just crack, it disintegrated. For a split second, there was nothing on his face but blank, stunned disbelief. His brain simply couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. Then, the disbelief curdled into a dark, volcanic rage. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jump from across the room. He pushed his chair back so violently it nearly toppled over. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think. He just reacted. He stormed toward me, his powerful strides eating up the distance between us. The remaining whispers in the room died completely. There was only the sound of his expensive shoes clicking angrily on the polished floor. He stopped right in front of me, his face inches from mine, his eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snarled, his voice a low, vicious growl. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin with bruising force. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I slowly, deliberately, looked down at his white-knuckled hand on my arm. Then I lifted my gaze to meet his furious one. My voice when I spoke was the complete opposite of his. It was calm, clear, and just loud enough for the silent, watching tables nearby to hear every single word. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, letting a small, innocent smile touch my lips. I tilted my head slightly. "She's family. I thought you'd be happy to see him." I paused, holding his gaze, letting my final words land with the force of a physical blow. "If you trust me, you won't mind." For a heart-stopping moment, Derek's fingers tightened on my arm, and I thought he might actually cause a scene right there in the middle of the floor. But my calm, unwavering gaze seemed to short-circuit his rage. My words, his own words, had hit their mark. He was a master manipulator, but he had never been manipulated himself, and he had no idea how to react. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. His face was a thundercloud of fury and humiliation. Without another word, he spun on his heel and stalked back to the head table, every line of his body radiating defeat. Nathan and I didn't rush. We walked calmly, gracefully, to the table designated for my family. My parents stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. I gave my mother a small, reassuring look that said, "It's okay. Just trust me." The air in the room was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. The music had restarted, but it was hesitant and no one was dancing. The main topic of conversation was no longer the happy couple. It was the drama unfolding in real time. Whispers followed us like a trail of smoke as Nathan pulled out my chair for me. We sat, two islands of calm in a sea of turmoil, behaving with perfect, unimpeachable decorum. The wedding coordinator, a woman with a permanently stressed expression, scurried to the DJ. The music softened, and the MC, a friend of my brother's, cleared his throat, trying desperately to regain control of the evening. "All right, everyone, let's settle down. It's time for a few words from our wedding party. First up, let's hear from the best man, Kevin." Kevin, bless his heart, looked like a deer in headlights. He stumbled up to the podium, fumbling with his note cards. Wow. Ben and Amelia, what a day, huh?" he began, laughing nervously. The laugh fell flat in the tense room. He stammered his way through a generic speech about friendship and love, his eyes darting nervously between our table and the head table. The whole thing was excruciatingly awkward, and everyone was relieved when he finally raised his glass, mumbled, "To the happy couple," and practically ran back to his seat. Then the MC's voice rang out again. "And now a toast from the bride's brother-in-law, Derek." A collective silent breath was drawn across the room. This was it. This was the moment everyone was waiting for. Derek pushed his chair back and stood up. He looked pale, almost ghostly, under the warm reception lights. He walked to the podium with the stiff, jerky movements of a puppet. He held a piece of paper in his hand, but it was trembling so violently I was surprised he could even hold it. He gripped the sides of the podium, his knuckles turning white, as if it were the only thing holding him upright. He looked out at the crowd, but he wasn't seeing them. His eyes, filled with a venomous hatred, locked onto mine. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. He swallowed hard and tried again. Nothing. The words were trapped in his throat, choked by the sheer force of his public humiliation. His gaze flickered from me to Nathan, sitting calmly by my side. Then his eyes darted to Audrey. She was leaning forward, her expression a desperate plea, trying to silently will him to pull himself together. But seeing her only seemed to make it worse. It was a public admission of their private bond. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, a man completely undone. The charming, confident husband I knew was gone, replaced by this trembling, speechless shell. He was supposed to give a toast, to raise his glass to my brother and his new wife. But he couldn't. His hand, resting on the podium, was shaking too much. He couldn't even lift his glass. The man who had orchestrated this entire situation, who had set this test of loyalty, was so consumed by his own downfall that he couldn't perform the simplest of wedding duties. With a final, shuddering breath, he gave up. He slammed his trembling hand down on the podium with a loud crack that made everyone jump. Then, without a single word, he turned and stormed back to his chair, slumping into it in utter defeat. The room was left in stunned, deafening silence, and in that silence Audrey made her final, fatal mistake. She instinctively rushed to his side, placing a comforting hand on his arm, her face a mask of concern. It wasn't the act of a simple family friend. It was the act of a partner, and every single person in that room saw it. The silence that followed Derek's failure was a living thing. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with the unspoken judgment of 200 people. Audrey's hand on Derek's arm was like a spotlight, illuminating the truth for everyone to see. They were a unit, and I was the intruder. Trying to salvage the disaster, Derek's father, a proud man who valued appearances above all else, stood up. He raised his glass with a shaky hand and a forced, brittle smile. "Well, emotions are clearly running high on this beautiful day," he boomed, his voice artificially cheerful. "Let's all just take a breath and raise a glass to the happy couple Ben and Amelia." A few people clapped weakly, but it was a pathetic attempt to patch a hole in a sinking ship. The damage was done. The truth was out. His father's intervention, meant to calm the situation, was the final spark that ignited Derek's explosive temper. The humiliation was too much for him to bear. He shot up from his chair, his face a terrifying mask of crimson rage. He pointed a trembling finger directly at me, his voice finally breaking free in a raw, furious shout that echoed through the hall. "You!" he roared, all pretense of charm gone. "You did this! You couldn't just be happy for your brother. You had to make it about you. You ruined your own brother's wedding." Every eye was on me. This was the moment he expected me to crumble, to cry, to prove I was the hysterical, jealous wife he'd always painted me to be. But I didn't crumble. I didn't even flinch. Slowly, I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. My voice when I spoke was calm and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Ruined it?" I asked, my voice carrying across the silent room. "No, Derek. I didn't ruin anything. I just brought the truth into the light." I looked around the room, at the curious and shocked faces, and then my gaze settled back on my husband. "For 5 years, I have lived in the shadow of your friendship with Audrey. For 5 years, I have been told I am too sensitive and untrusting. I have been subjected to endless tests of my loyalty, all while my own loyalty was being betrayed." I took a step forward. "This week, you told me that if I trusted you, I wouldn't mind you inviting your ex-girlfriend to my brother's wedding. But trust is a two-way street, Derek. It isn't a weapon one person uses to control the other. It's something that is earned, and it is something you broke a long, long time ago." My voice was steady, filled with a strength I didn't even know I possessed. "Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. The respect you have consistently failed to give me, and the respect I finally decided to give myself." As my words hung in the air, Nathan stood up beside me. He didn't look angry. He just looked profoundly sad and dignified. "She's right," he said, his quiet voice resonating with authority. "My wife's friendship with Derek has not been an innocent one. It has been a source of pain for both of our families for a very long time. Chloe is not being unreasonable. For the first time, she is being honest." That was it. The final nail in the coffin. It was no longer a wife's accusation. It was a confirmed fact. The truth settled over the room, heavy and undeniable. Derek and Audrey sat frozen in a spotlight of their own making, their faces pale with shock and exposure. They were utterly and completely alone. My work was done. I turned away from them and walked to the head table, to my brother and his new wife. Their faces were full of concern. "Ben, Amelia," I said softly, my voice thick with genuine regret. "I am so sorry that this happened on your day." Ben stood up immediately and wrapped me in a hug. "Chloe, you have nothing to be sorry for. he whispered, holding me tight. Amelia joined the hug, her eyes full of empathy. We love you, she said. We're here for you. In that embrace, I felt the last of the tension leave my body. I had my family, the real one. I gave them one last squeeze, and then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back at Derek. I didn't need to. He was a chapter of my life that was now, finally, closed. I walked past the silent tables, past the staring guests, and straight toward the grand oak doors. I didn't walk out with Nathan. I walked out alone. As I stepped out into the cool, clean night air, I took my first breath of freedom. The heavy cloak of his expectations, of his tests, of his lies, simply dissolved into the darkness. My head was high, my shoulders were back, and for the first time in years, I was walking toward a future that was entirely my own.